Hello. Since I demonstrated my last vid, where I proved that the Große Kurfürst does in fact have turtleback armor, I got a request to show what difference it makes in comparison when when you get shot at from a T10 battleship. So the first volley here, I'm in my Montana. First volley I shot was at the Montana, which I proceeded to one-shot. The next volley I will shoot is at the Yamato. And you might notice the Yamato and Montana are both 4 kilometers away, or roughly. One shot the Yamato as well, and of course the Große Kurfürst is 1.9 kilometers away, so he's by far the closest out of them all. And of course the effect that the turtleback armor has, meaning the citadel is protected by internal armor, of course the citadel is still even more vulnerable, one might say, at range, where plunging fire can basically land above the protection and still hit the citadel. But at close range, like this, well, the same volley that one-shot the other two T10 battleships roughly took out a fourth of his HP. If even that. Well, roughly a fourth, I think, is fairly accurate. So that is the power of the turtleback armor, and that is why the Große Kurfürst will be quite a terrifying foe when brawling other battleships at close range, and of course one of the reasons why I never considered it as weak as other people claimed. Just for shits and giggles, there's another Yamato one-shot. Anyway, let's move on to the actual Bayern commentary. Right, starting off, I'm actually going to demonstrate 2 games with the Bayern, because with the way matchmaking is skewed right now, I felt like just showing a single game against T6s and T5s wouldn't really be that accurate, because ever since 0.5.9, where they basically tried to improve matchmaking, I'm making quotations mark in the air here, which you can't see, but the so-called improved matchmaking has basically meant that T5s constantly end up against T7s and T6s constantly end up against T8s. So with that in mind, I figured I'll post 2 gameplay vids and show off first of all how it does against when it's top tier and how it does when it's against T8s. Now, as usual for commenters, I'm of course solo. A lot of people often commentate on how divisions skew results, and I agree, which is why when I actually review ships, when I test ships, review ships, and make commentaries, I'm always playing solo, because I'm pretty sure the average player is mostly going to be playing solo, and divisions are, I think, a bit rarer. I mean, based on what I normally see in games, divisions seem to be significantly rarer than actually playing solo. Anyway, moving on to the actual ship, of course. I've gotten a bit sidetracked here. The first thing you'll notice is the large similarities with the Warspite, which is of course something I will be commentating on quite a bit, because I feel like this is almost, well, Germany and Britain of course, but it's more of the fact that it feels like a pretty much direct competitor. It does have better range than the Warspite, but on the other hand it doesn't have the spotting plane advantage, but that's not really a loss, because permanently better range is much better than having temporary better range. So in this aspect, of course, the Bayern quite obviously wins. The Fuso, it doesn't have the extreme ranges of the Fuso, and I mean even the New Mexico has good range when you slot in the range module, which you kind of need at these lower tier ships. So it's definitely competitive here. I mean, you don't really need the massive range that the Fuso has, but of course it's always nice being able to engage at any range. The accuracy seems quite solid, but of course, it's the same way as the Warspite, it suffers from a lack of guns. I mean, sure, it has the big caliber, but it makes the same trade-offs that the Warspite does. It doesn't have 12 guns, but in return it has more powerful guns. In this case, it has 380mm guns, whereas the Warspite has 381. The New Mexican Fuso, of course, both have 356mm guns, so it's a trade-off as usual. Now, the shell speed is actually quite decent. It's faster than the Fusos and the Warspites. It's 800 meters per second. The Warspite has probably the slowest shells, I think, at 732. The Fuso, I think, was at 780 or something, whereas the Warspite just barely beats it at 830 or so. But once again, it's kind of in the middle of the pack, but it's worth noting that it's significantly faster than the Warspite shells, since that's the ship I will be comparing it quite a bit to, since it's very, very similar in many ways. As for the, of course, Rudder Shift, or well, let's start off with the speed. It's actually, I think it's the fastest T6 battleship until the Dunkirk arrives. The Dunkirk, of course, is going to be the fastest at 29.5, I think, but the Bayern is able to do 25 knots, which is very, very impressive, because I think the Fuso does 24.5. For some reason people think the Fuso is very, very fast. It's not. So this one is actually faster than a Fuso, and it's of course faster than the Warspite and significantly faster than both the Arizona and the New Mexico. And of course another thing worth mentioning is concealment. It actually has only 13.4 concealment, and that's I think without camo. If you slap a good camo on it, you get it something 13-ish. So that's of course extremely good. In comparison, the Fuso stock with the best hull, the concealment on the Fuso is 18.9. So the Fuso is of course the big loser. That's one of the huge drawbacks of the Fuso, is of course the garbage concealment. And that's one of the reasons the Fuso tends to suffer a bit when it gets up against the high tier matchmaking, is because lack of concealment, lots of citadels to hit and so forth. But anyway, moving on. The secondaries are decent, quite good on it. The biggest issue it has is that half of its secondaries are shooting AP, which is of course a weakness because AP can bounce and so forth, whereas HE is effective against every type of ship. This low caliber AP isn't going to do much against cruisers or battleships, and well, even against DDs it's unlikely to be as useful as HE. But still, it has a fair amount of them, but of course having half of them AP is of course a significant weakness that must be pointed out. Now, Rudder Shift 13.9, that's just about kind of in the middle of the pack of them all. That's around what they all have. They have somewhere between 13 and 15, so that's not especially good, not especially bad. The turning circle is 630 meters, which is actually really good. The only one that actually beats it is the Warspite, which has a 550 meter turning circle, which is absolutely god tier. That's an amazing. In fact, I posted a stream highlight of my Warspite gameplay against various German battleships just earlier today, and I posted it kind of in preparation of this one because Warspite is kind of a direct competitor or a direct comparison to this ship. So if you're interested in seeing how the Warspite does against various ships, I fight like Tirpitzes, Scharnhorsts, and a Bayern in that clip, so it kind of gives some indication of just how the Warspite does. And it does of course quite well, because I really enjoy that ship as well. But moving on, the Bayern, you can see how, by the way, if you see my maneuvering, I kind of push right into B, no real fear, and I'm pushing right up into these. And that's something I've noticed. This ship really is a bully. Of course, like all German battleships, it has turtleback armor, so you can't really get citadeled. So pushing in like this, showing broadside and that, you don't have the same kind of fear of it, and you don't eat as much punishment as the Warspite does. No, worth noting is I think the Warspite has turtleback as well, but the Warspite is prone to take these random big hits at times, which I haven't really noticed with the Bayern. The Bayern it's just really, really tanky and just very strong guns. Now, the guns actually don't feel as strong as the Warspite guns. That confused me for a while. I mean, I compared the stats a lot. I mean, the Bayern guns do 10.9k damage, and the Warspite guns do 11.4. You can see the great rudder shift and turning circle, easily dodging out of the way of these torps. So many causes angry at me. And I'm not even afraid to continue pushing in, even though there's a Minikaze here, which is like a huge threat. And of course I recommend you play safer than I do, but I'm, as I've often called, I'm retardedly aggressive. Play as I say, not as I do. Being this aggressive against a DD in a battleship is never recommended. It's kind of, I just like playing with fire in general. Worth noting, of course, is the Torpedo Belt on this ship. Okay, I'm definitely gonna eat one of these torps. I guess that's a punishment I get for being cocky. The Torpedo Belt on this ship, as typical for German battleships, is incredibly weak. It only has a 21% reduction to torpedoes, which is by far the worst. The Warspite also has a fairly bad one at 24%, and of course neither of those compared to the Fuso, which has 34, or the New Mexico, which has a staggering 40% torpedo reduction. So, but it's still worth noting, of course, the Bayern has the worst torpedo belt out of them all. HP wise, 51.6k, that's kinda in the middle of the pack again. It's not as much as the Fuso, but it's a bit more than the others and so forth. Pretty balanced overall, not as much as the Warspite. Once again, kinda in the middle of the pack. I don't really find comparing a couple K of HP here and there on battleship that important, because it's literally like one penetrating AP shell from another battleship worth of damage we're talking about, so not that important. Now, what I was talking about was I found it very strange that I constantly found the Warspite guns. Actually, when I played this, I tended to play the Warspite in between just to get a feel for the comparison. And what I found extremely strange was that I was constantly finding the Warspite guns to be meatier, more powerful, and like getting bigger chunks. Now the Warspite guns do deal 500? Yeah, 500 more damage per citadel, but I didn't think that that was enough to justify how much stronger they felt. That was until I started looking at the actual shell speed, the shell velocity. The Warspite has a shell velocity of 732 meters per second, whereas the Bayern has a shell speed of 800. Now faster shell speed is of course better because it's much easier to land your shells, but what I realized was because the Warspite has such slow shells, it gets a much higher use out of plunging fire, meaning when the shell arcs high up in the sky and then it falls down on the deck, so it kind of bypasses the broadside armor and instead slams into the deck and the superstructure, and I felt like I got more advantage out of it. Now usually guns with faster shell velocity are going to be an advantage, but I played the Warspite so much, I have like 100 games, so I'm so used to the shell speed that I'm fairly confident in landing shells even with the slow speed. So that's probably why I ultimately felt that the shells felt stronger. And I still feel like the shells on the Warspite do feel stronger. But am I gonna dodge this? I'm gonna eat one, I think. Not too bad. I could have slowed down more, I think, and dodged them, but he's the last guy alive and I just want to go kill him. Of course, I'm not getting any, if you notice, I'm not getting any achievements and such, because this was done during the preview phase, meaning when we were, us community contributors were given the ships for testing purposes, so I didn't get my close quarters kill in the middle, and I've gotten no devastating strikes or confederates or anything, because of course, because it's a testing version. But still, you can see 96k damage, I got 4 kills, and I'm hunting for my 5th. And if you saw the ridiculously aggressive way I sailed this ship, like, I would say, in fact, cocky way I sailed that straight into B, which is basically DD heaven, and then I pushed straight up north into A, and I spawned down at C. I took shots at them at sea as well, so this thing is, if you end up against T6 or T5 matchmaking, just like the other T6 battleships, well, except maybe the Dunkirk, you are just incredibly strong, and you're such a bully. Ridiculously strong in this. Well, now I gotta slow down and turn, I don't want to get one shot. But once again, the great turning circle. I only end up hitting 2 of those torps. And, well, Warspite might have been able to avoid them all. Honestly, that's how well the Warspite turns. But still, very, very strong ship, and very a big bully, honestly, when you end up against same tier games. Ended up with over 100k damage and topped the scores with my Bayern. Anyway, let's see how this guy does against T8 matchmaking. Alright, moving on to some T8 matchmaking. Now, if some of you are wondering, like, that my game looks a bit weird, a bit strange, I was experimenting with a mod during this time when I was previewing the ship that removes the fog from the game. I wondered if that would maybe help for the stream. If some of you don't know, I stream quite a bit, and I was a bit worried about the ships looking foggy at distance and being unable to really make them out on people who were like watching the stream at lower qualities. So I'm trying like a no fog mod, but ultimately I ended up removing this no fog mod because I found it annoying to look at. It's kind of awkward to make out distances to land vessels, and honestly, I don't know, it just felt weird. I'm probably too used to the stock game that playing without the fog on just felt weird. So in case you're wondering why it looks so crisp and clear at long distances like this is because I'm using that mod, which I ultimately uninstalled because it felt weird. Oh, if you see that trick I'm doing here, what I'm doing is I'm tapping the map key twice real fast, because for those who don't know, when you tap the map key you get like an animation where you zoom out into the sky to the map, and if you tap it fast you get the animation of zooming out or above and then returning back, so you can basically see above and behind obstacles, which is what I was doing there, hoping to get an idea where this Pensacola was heading if I wanted to take the shot, but ultimately I decided to wait until he showed himself before taking the shot. Now this is a T8 matchmaking I'm against. Of course, Pensacola is one of those targets that every battleship loves, regardless of tier. I mean, even T5 can wreck a Pensacola simply because of the thin armor and the large citadel that you can exploit as long as you land the proper shots, which I am struggling to do right now. But then again, I feel like as of late I've been getting a lot of over penetrations. I don't know, it might just be RNG or something, but I'm feeling I'm getting a lot of over penetrations instead of citadels. But they're at least got one citadel, and I doubt I'll have time to shoot him before he dies now, because he's turning broadside, which is kind of a death sentence in the Pensacola, turning broadside to a bunch of other ships. Okay, our Mogami is using torps on him instead of just shooting him. That's an interesting decision. Okay, I finally decided to shoot him and he died. Shame I wasted my wallet. We should be securing A though. Anyway, moving on, of course. Bayern versus Warspite in high tier games. Now, that's a bit of an interesting comparison because against higher tiers, I feel like the Bayern does actually quite a bit better. Simply because the turtleback armor means that you're less prone to those random citadels, those random huge chunkings of HP that sometimes tend to plague the Warspite. I'm sure anyone who's played the Warspite know that feel of suddenly losing a huge chunk of HP. Now it's not as prevalent anymore since they updated the armor model in, was it 0.5.9? But it still happens at times. Also, I find the faster shell velocity to be more useful when fighting high tiers, because you kind of want to stay more at the distance than you can at low tiers. At low tiers there's no issue being aggressive and pushing in, but against high tiers, when you're against T7, T8 battleships, and of course you end up against very potent HE slingers as well, Mogamis and Kutuzovs and such, that you don't really want to be pushing into them because you just get melted. So when you have to play more at range, I definitely prefer the Bayern's increased range and faster shell velocity. Interestingly though, I've been comparing my stats between the Warspite and the Bayern, and I've been getting almost identical stats, and in my experience I've been performing pretty much identically with them as well. I found them equal, but I'm pretty sure that can be attributed to my own experience with the Warspite more than anything. I think for a new player who's just started, they will find the Bayern superior, and it's simply because I probably have about 100 Warspite games that I'm so used to the ship, and basically what makes it tick, that's why I'm ultimately having an equal experience. If I play the Bayern as much, I'll probably ultimately end up finding the ship superior as well. From a stats point of view, I do think it is superior though. One thing I should of course also touch on is the anti-air. In this case, the Bayern straight up beats out the Warspite completely. The Warspite has some of the worst anti-air, whereas the Bayern actually has, well, its close range anti-air is pretty, close and medium range is pretty dreadful, but it actually has a nice chunk of anti-air on its long range guns. On the D stock I think is 4.5 kilometers and it has 100 AA DPS. So if someone wanted to pimp that out with manual AA, or even AFT I guess, but mostly manual AA would of course benefit this ship the most. But in general, just slapping on this torp should fade, right? Okay, I'm playing with fire here. Oh god, I got cocked. Did I really just do that? That was cocky of me. Okay, well, at least you got to see how much... That was a T6 Mutsuki, by the way. I thought to launch this torp significantly earlier. at least you got to see just how much damage you lose if you end up eating just 2 torpedoes. You saw how much HP I had and how much HP I lost from eating just 2 torpedoes to my broadside. And that's a huge weakness of the Torpedo Belt. Now, of course, I should not have eaten those to begin with. That was just my arrogance, cockiness coming into play, because I'm fairly confident we're going to win this game. We already have a significant advantage and so forth. But of course, oh, thank you RNG for that volley. But I guess ultimately that was good, and I'm actually gonna post that as well, because even though yes I made a mistake, but ultimately that mistake was good for the commentary, because it gave you an actual real world demonstration of just how incredibly hard torpedoes punish this ship, which is of course the case for the Warspite as well, but the Warspite does turn significantly faster. I mean, 550 meter turning circle is just ridiculous on a battleship. But yeah, definitively avoid torps at all costs in this thing. I would say that's one of the big weaknesses really of this ship, and that's probably why I will still rate the New Mexico as a better ship than the Bayern, is simply because 40% turret reduction and still handles like a god. I would still say the New Mexico is simply the god. Of course, I rate Fuso as the best T6 battleship, followed by the New Mexico. And after that, it comes kind of a trade-off, like Arizona is really good, but I really like the Warspite as well, and I actually like the Bayern as well, so not really an easy question to answer. I mean, none of them match the statistics I can put up in a Fuso in terms of pure damage. It's the only battleship or T6 battleship I can consistently just go way over 90k damage on average in, but it's still a very strong ship. The Bayern it continues the trend of these German battleships that are very, very balanced and very strong in multiple ways. Like, very few actual weaknesses besides the, of course, inevitable weak torpedo belt, which I can perfectly live with. What else should we mention? Oh, turret traverse. Should mention the turret traverse. 51.4 seconds by default. Of course, significantly beats out the terribly slow Warspite turret traverse, which is of course one of the huge weaknesses of the Warspite. It has a 72-second by stock. Of course, you can significantly reduce that with expert marksman, but still it's worth pointing out that this ship has by stock 20 seconds faster turret traverse. So definitively beats out the Warspite in that aspect. And I think that's one of the reasons as well that for a new player or one who hasn't played either ship, they will find this ship vastly superior, simply because they don't have to struggle with that very, very slow turret traverse. Of course, 15 kilometers away, doing significant damage on a Colorado without any issues at all, because once again 380mm guns are very, very strong. In fact, that's the same guns you'll be running around with on a Bismarck or Tirpitz or even Gneisenau. In fact, that's something a bit weird about the Gneisenau, isn't it? The fact that you actually lose firepower going from the Bayern to the Gneisenau. You go down, yes, you gain some reload speed from 30 seconds to 26, but you lose a whole turret in the process. So definitely end up losing a significant amount of alpha damage on your volley when you go up one tier, which is probably one of the reasons why I didn't kind of like the Gneisenau. Like, a downgrade in firepower is always a bit frustrating. Damage my turret, but at this point it doesn't really matter. And ultimately those torpedoes I hit, while they limited my aggression a bit and forced me to use some repairs, that didn't really affect the outcome of the game. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be posting this commentary, because it shows you just how much damage I lost in just 2 torpedoes. And that's something you will have, 2 Mutsuki torpedoes that is, and that's something you'll have to keep an eye out for in this ship when you're playing it, that you make sure you don't eat any torps. Of course, carriers will try to go for you, but they're not really going to have an easy time of doing it, because once again, strong anti-air and a fairly strong torpedo belt combined, oh well, not strong torpedo belt, Jesus, I'm just contradicting myself, and a good turning circle makes you kind of hard to hit. And because of the anti-air, I think for same level carriers to drop you is going to be a bit too costly for their taste, especially if they're low tier. Of course, if you end up against T7 or T8 carriers, then all bets are off, because they have the planes to spare, and your anti-air doesn't really deal with higher tier planes that well, so definitely gonna be a struggle. Let's see if I can break 100k here as well. What did I get? 101, 102k damage in that previous game. Should be able to get the same thing against T6. Ah, there we go. Hey, 102k damage. I think the game is gonna end before I have time to do anything else. Of course, as usual, the only enemies left on the enemy team are battleships. That's a pretty common trend. Cruisers push in and DDs push in and die. Battleships sit in the back and then complain about lack of support when everyone else dies while they're sitting in the back. 102k damage. Not anything special, but I did end up topping the score in T8 matchmaking, which is of course always satisfying to do in a T6 ship. So the Bayern, definitely a strong ship and definitely a ship worth recommending. Very, very warmly indeed. Alright, as usual, I will start off with the modules, and it's fairly straightforward here. The one thing that you want is the hull upgrade. The hull upgrade is massive here. It gives you HP, it gives you torpedo protection, it improves your main battery range and reduces dispersion, it improves your secondaries, it improves your AA significantly, it improves your rudder shift time significantly, it reduces your detectability range. It's like the hull upgrade is everything in one. Just get that one first. There's not really much of an argument. It's such a huge upgrade for the ship that very much straightforward. Improves your ship in pretty much every single way. Second, get the range upgrade. I mean, speed is always nice, but range is more important on a battleship. Get the range upgrade, and once you have the range upgrade, then you can get the speed upgrade. 2.5 knots doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're doing 22.5, it suddenly sounds like a whole lot. So get that one next. I'll just take my Friedrich here to see, since I don't have the ship anymore. Consumable wise, I always recommend a premium damage control party, and if you can afford it, the premium repair party. Upgrade wise, main armaments for the main guns, of course. The only one really worth considering. Aiming system, once again, for the main guns, and damage control to reduce damage and flooding chance, and second damage control to reduce flooding and fire duration. Anyway, and you don't really need to get the rudder shift module because your rudder shift is already 13.9, which is more than enough, so take the reduction in fire and flooding duration instead. And finally, captain wise, I'll just take my Friedrich the Größe captain. Basics of survivability, must have. Expert marksman, must have. Superintendent, if you plan on leveling up to the future ones, T8, T9, T10. Otherwise you can go vigilance, AFT, or manual fire control. AFT if you plan on going for that secondary build later on. Manual AA if you plan on staying on the T6 or going for some heavy AA builds, then manual AA is great. And finally T5, either concealment if you plan on leveling up to the T10s or T9, T10, or manual fire control if you just want to go for a secondary build at the Bismarck or even later on. Anyway, that was my Bayern commentary. I hope you guys enjoyed it.